Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of our podcast. And in this podcast episode, we will discuss and remind everyone to take a thorough look at your bike once you start riding after so many months of lockdown. So let's start this quick podcast after this intro. Now, so most of us, our fellow riders, have not ridden their vehicles in the lockdown period. We will talk about two-wheelers in particular. Now, with the lockdown easing out, most of us have decided to take our two-wheelers out for a ride or have decided to go for a ride. Now, with this exciting prospect of leaving our house after so many months, we have forgotten some cardinal rules of riding. One of the important ones being your bike checked. One of the important ones being getting your bike checked before you ride. Now, before we plan the ride, most people simply try to start the bike, and if it starts, they will clean it up, get some greasing done, get the tire pressure checked, and take the bike for a ride. But amid all of these simple steps lies a freaking irritating problem. Now, when your bike stays put for a long time at one place, they will definitely have some issues when you start the bike again. When you decide to start up your two-wheeler after a long time for a ride, you have to look into a few things or checks which are important before you take your bike out for a ride. So let's start by talking about them and in this podcast episode. So first up is of course the brake check. Now this part needs to be checked first. In the brakes, multiple issues can occur if you leave it high and dry for a long time. Brake shoe and lever can gather rust and stiffness when you don't ride your bike for a long time. You should get your brake shoe and lever checked or replaced if need be. Most people try to press the brakes to check if the bike stops. Now, if it does, people will leave it as it is and they don't check the brakes thoroughly before they go out on the ride. Now, we urge you, please don't do that, as in many instances, the brake shoe is worn off and scuffed, but it will work for a while and deceive you before it gives out. If this happens in an unfortunate moment in between your ride, it can lead to a disastrous situation for you on the road. Now, to avoid this deceptive nature of the brakes, check your brakes to see if it is rusted, damaged or not. If it is, please go and get it replaced immediately through a proper workshop or a company-based service center. So this you need to do before you take out your bike for a ride. After the brake, next comes the chain test. A bike chain is an important part of the mechanical system as it links power generated to the movement of your bike. Now, any sort of issue in this linkage, alignment or tension can lead to the breakage of the chain when you least expect it to do. Most riders ignore to check the chain. They try, if it looks fine and it is connected to the surface, they just tend to grease it and leave it as it is. We request you, please check it, look into it, as since you have not ridden the bike for the longest of time, it can be gullible to looseness, breakage and stiffness. If you find this sort of looseness, breakage or stiffness in the chain, you need to get it checked before it snaps and breaks at any given point of time when you ride. So make sure your chain is properly fitted, it is properly greased, and all the linkage points in the chain are actually connected, are properly connected and well maintained before you ride. So after this chain check, let's move on to the third check, which is fork or shock absorber check. Now we're talking about shock absorbers or forks of your vehicle. Of course, you need them to manage the bumps on the road. Now our roads, unfortunately, have a lot of bumps, be it the highways or the city roads. Now when you don't ride your bike for the longest time, the shock absorbers or forks of your two-wheeler become stiff and create difficulties while you ride, as they are not able to absorb the bumps on the road. Now if you ignore this problem, you might end up crashing in the middle of the road, as your bike will not be able to manage the bumps. It can get disbalanced and it can crash at the worst possible place that you don't want. You need to check the stiffness of the forks or the shock absorbers before you take your bike on the ride, so that it does not give up on you. The shockers can leak oil, can get rusted and become stiff. The shock pressure can go off and many things can go wrong. So you need to check all of this before you go out on a ride. It can be done through a very simple way, where you need to just sit on the bike, lift it and then press the shock as hard as you can. Keep pressing the shock, and if you feel any sort of oil leakage or stiffness, you need to definitely get your shock absorbers checked, greased or replaced as soon as possible. We urge you to do or perform this check before you go out on a ride. After you check your forks, let's move on to another part of the two-wheeler which is completely ignored by a lot of riders. That part that we mentioned is a wheel bearing. Now bearings are required to keep the two-wheeler wheels rolling smoothly. Any sort of issue can lead to restricted movement of the wheels, due to which the bike or the scooter can for a toss. We request you to take a serious look at the wheel bearings before you go out on the ride, as you need to see if all the bearings are there and they keep the tire movement swift and smooth. If you're not able to check it yourself, we want you to show it to a mechanic or a service center where the said person can open the wheel cast and check the rings or the balls inside that cast. You can check if all the bearings are available or they are working properly. This will help in the better tire movement of your bike, and it will avoid a lot of accident related issues on the road. So please get the wheel bearings checked before you go on a ride. After the wheel bearings, there's another thing that you need to check before you take your bike anywhere. The thing is the old lights which are there in your bike. Now lights in the front and the back of the bike tend to dim out when you don't use them, especially during the lockdown when the bike was kept in a garage. The intensity of the light will dim out with time due to no use, and any issue in case of light can lead to serious accidents on the road. We request you, don't ignore it. You need those lights especially to ride in the night time, and if you find any sort of dimness in the light, you need to get it checked and replaced immediately before you go out to ride. We request you get your lights checked and make sure their lighting levels are up to the mark at all possible times. After the lights, there's one extra tip I want to give you, which is you need to check your indicators lights. Now, along with your main lights, you need to check your indicator lights. Now people don't feel the need to check up on them, but they are very essential on the road. So if you find any sort of indicator lights dimming out, you need to get them replaced and realize the importance of all 4 indicators. So get all of these checks done before you leave and take your bike on the ride. Most riders tend to do 2 to 3 checks and ignore all of the above. We made this podcast for you guys as we thought you might forget some of these. Now, these are the checks that most riders completely forget while they ride their bike. Now that we have listed them for you, there is no reason why you should not get all the things done in the list. Please make sure that you share this podcast episode with everyone you know. These checks are really important and need to be sorted out before you go out on a ride. We want everyone, all our fellow riders, to have a safe and a fruitful ride. Remember, riding is important, but safety is the number one priority. With this message, we end our podcast episode. If you like our episode, tell us in the comment section. Like, subscribe, and share our content. Our podcast, which is called the Motopsychcle Podcast, is available on all the audio platforms as well as in our YouTube channel called Motopsycle TV. We will bring you more episodes, guest interviews, guest discussions, and newer topics in the upcoming episodes. Till then, follow us on social media for more updates. We have mentioned all the IDs in the descriptions below. And don't forget to ride safe, always wear a protective gear, and ride everywhere. Now, this message, till our next episode, we take your leave. Make sure you follow all these points and take care of yourself. Till then, it's time to say bye-bye and ciao.